In England, the desire to chart a global trade route was at its peak, and as relations with Spain began to deteriorate, Queen Elizabeth encouraged the backing of an expedition to sail around the world, a feat that had been accomplished only once before by a Spanish expedition under Ferdinand Magellan in 1519. Francis Drake was chosen to command 5 small ships and a crew of about 160 men. The expedition set sail from Plymouth, England in December 1577 on a voyage that proved to be extremely difficult. Drake was forced to put down a mutiny off the Patagonian coast and ultimately abandoned 2 small storeships. It took 16 days to pass through the Strait of Magellan. One ship abandoned the quest and returned to England, and another disappeared during a storm. So, by the time he reached the Pacific Ocean, Francis Drake was left with only one ship, the Golden Hind. He traveled up the coasts of Chile and Peru, raiding Spanish ships along the way, and then sailed far to the north before returning south and landing near present-day San Francisco. He claimed the surrounding region for England and named it New Albion. Drake then set off to England through the Indian Ocean down to the Cape of Good Hope, around the tip of Africa, and finally reached England on September 20th, 1580. His ship, the Golden Hind, was filled with treasures and spices. For his accomplishments, he was knighted Sir Francis Drake by Queen Elizabeth and became the most famous English seaman of the Elizabethan age.
Spain versus England, the fight of the century. The 16th century, that is. You must remember from earlier that Spain and England were not friends but quite enemies, and after the death of Mary Stuart, Queen of the Scots, the skirmish erupted into war. Therefore, the Spanish Armada was the most powerful fleet of ships known in the world, and England was still regarded as a minor power. All we had was just a few fast ships. Therefore, when Spain announced its war and the attack of the Armada, we ourselves rode out to Tilbury to give a speech which you heard at the beginning of this presentation, to fight the Spanish. Now, it was a major accomplishment, for out of nowhere, during that time, when the Spanish were attacking the English ships, a mighty storm came up, and the great ships could not navigate their ways through the water and the storm, but the small English ships could, for the choppy waters of the channel made it easier for them, and therefore the Spanish Armada had 132 great ships with cannons and all, but it only took our 30 full ships and 163 armed merchant ships under Lord Howard of Effingham, Sir Francis Drake, known as El Draco by the Spanish, and Sir John Hawkins. Because of these great men and our tiny English ships, we defeated the Spanish Armada, put them in great shame, and thus England became the greatest power in the world. Therefore, the stage has now been set for America and Great Britain. Who is Sir Walter Raleigh? Not Walter, Water. Therefore, before we can speak of Sir Walter Raleigh, you must understand, at this time, England was now interested in expanding to the New World. Spain had already been doing so, and now that England was starting to gather money from, perishing ships, therefore we were able to finally finance ships to go to the New World. Hence, many gentlemen came to our court to ask for financing for the New World. We finally gave that permission in 1578 to Sir Humphrey Gilbert, but unfortunately he perished at sea in 1583. Therefore, his half-brother, Sir Walter Raleigh, took up the charge and began to court ourselves again for monies to finance ships to go to the New World. In 1584, I finally gave Raleigh a patent to discover lands in the New World and to claim this land for ourselves and for England. Therefore, Raleigh organized this voyage of exploration, and it was led by Captain Arthur Barlow and Philip Armadas, under the guidance of an experienced Portuguese pilot named Simon Fernando. The expedition's 2 ships left England in 1584 and landed 3 months later in present-day North Carolina. Hence, this became the Roanoke colony. It was first started as a military group, and over several years it became thus of families and children, for they were shipped from England to there. These following films will tell you more of Roanoke.
North Carolina was the site of England's first attempt at colonization in America. It all started in 1584, when Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to a vast region of land along the east coast of America to her friend Sir Walter Raleigh. Explorers from England searched for a good site for a colony, and they selected Roanoke Island just off the mainland of North Carolina. The following year, over 100 men and boys arrived at the island. Their goal was to create a base for supplying English warships. But they soon realized that the island's shallow waters would make running such a base impossible. And so they abandoned their mission and returned to England. The next attempt at colonization happened 2 years later, when a group of 117 men, women, and children sailed off to colonize land further north in Virginia. But due to some confusion, they ended up at Roanoke Island too. After several months on the island, there were struggles with the Native Americans, and the colonists needed more supplies. So the ship that had brought them to America returned to England to get them. However, a major war broke out between Spain and England, and the English needed every ship they could find. As a result, 3 years passed by before the supply ship could safely return to Roanoke Island. When the ship finally got back in 1590, the island was deserted. In fact, the only sign of the colonists were the letters C-R-O, carved in a tree. These letters may have been a reference to Croatoan Island to the south. But to this day, the fate of the Roanoke colonists of North Carolina remains a great mystery, and no trace of them has ever been found.